Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 589th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, the Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring William Wegman and Andrew Lampert with Charlotte Kent. We're thrilled to welcome poet Jonathan Aprea here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we're on Lenapehoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We encourage you to check the chat for a living document of resources and actions. The Brooklyn Rail would like to thank the Terra Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive. You can view today's event and our full archive on the Rail's YouTube channel. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's guests and host. Born in Holyoke, Massachusetts in 1943, William Wegman is an artist best known for his portraits of his Weimaraner dogs. His work has been exhibited extensively in both the United States and abroad. Wegman's exhibitions have traveled throughout the US and internationally, and his videos and photos have appeared in a variety of films, advertisements, books, and television programs, such as Sesame Street and Saturday Night Live. Working primarily in film, video, and performance, Andrew Lampert pursues the alchemy between artist, art, and audience in public space, especially that of cinema. A trained film archivist, Lampert revels in cinema as a performative environment and reclaims this space from a mass media culture to emphasize its potential for immediacy and accident. Assistant Professor of Visual Culture, Charlotte Kent, PhD, has a particular interest in historical frameworks for assorted practices, digital culture, and the absurd. She writes for assorted magazines and publishes her research in various academic journals, and she is an editor at large for the Brooklyn Rail. And with that, I'll pass the mic over to our host today, Charlotte Kent.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. It is an unexpected pleasure to be able to be in conversation today with Bill and Andrew. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm so pleased to have all of you here with us. It has been an interesting day, few days. I love Bill's work. I am a great appreciator of humor and the absurd. Why else would I spend so much of my research time, visit the books behind me, on this very topic? But I thought it was important today, perhaps of all days, to provide a little bit of context around the politics of humor and of the absurd, and why it is in fact such an extraordinarily helpful tool when we are living in interesting times. So I promise we will get into the conversation shortly with Bill and Andrew, but there are a few things I just wanted to say. For those of you who maybe think of the absurd as just being that thing where you laugh at something and it's just silly or it's nonsense. There's more to it than that, and it has an interesting history. So I'm going to start with the fact that in the Western philosophical and aesthetic tradition, tragedy has often been seen as one of the highest forms of art. We have Aristotle's text on it. There's much been written about it. But I want to point out that tragedy has always been and was very clearly delineated as being about the great and the powerful. And it's been about the great and powerful losing their standing, their power, their structures. And that was what those stories were always about. And there's an interesting way in which audiences, perhaps more common people, were called upon to sympathize with the loss of power that the great and mighty experienced. In contrast, comedy, about which far less has been written, though I will mention a few who have in a moment, has always been about the rest of us, the everyday people who don't have a lot of power, who are muddling along, trying to build what we can build in the lives that we have, and using humor to get by, to not get bogged down in the mire and complications and difficulties that sometimes we get wrangled into because the powerful pull us into it, or get dismayed by the lack of power that we have. Humor is a way to keep going in the face of the challenges that we have. Western philosophy has tended towards the serious. It has been its high hallmark to invoke important things and to tell us how best to live our lives. I'd like to point out how that seriousness is yet again a kind of instruction. It's about being informed about how to live your life. It's about being informed of what are the good decisions. And interestingly enough, though frequently less known, most of Western philosophers have occasionally, eventually, typically in the second half of their careers, gotten interested in humor. And most of the very famous philosophers have at some point in time eventually written about it, because it is actually such an interesting and difficult thing. It's so difficult to be funny. Most of us aren't. And there's something in that difficulty that we seek out. We want humor. We want a little bit of lightness. And perhaps maybe some of these philosophers who've been so entrenched in making sure that they understood what was, at some point in their careers realized maybe there was some value in being open to the not knowing and to the surprise. And that humor was a way to arrive there. And though maybe they were a little bit serious about humor because, you know, philosophy, there's some interesting texts around that. Nicholas Phelps is one scholar among many who wrote a text called Taking the Absurd Seriously. And he writes, taking the absurd seriously, I believe, concentrates attention neither on the self nor on society, but on the very real imaginative work demanded of being in the world. And there's something to that needs to be imaginative and creative about the world, to be able to not get mired in yourself or in the society that you're in, but to be able to think creatively. And what's fascinating is another scholar, Conrad Hires, who is a professor of the history of religion, wound up spending much of his career writing about why it was that in the Western philosophical tradition, seriousness abounded, and yet in the Eastern, there is a constant and repeated use of humor as a part of the practice of being present, and of being able to step into each present moment, open with unexpected things coming at you, prepared to act. I think one of the things about art is that when it is truly great, it opens us up into being able to be surprised, to break out of the binds that make us think we know what is, and allows us, therefore, to imagine, and to imagine a new politics, and to imagine a new self, and to imagine a new society, and to imagine that maybe words and pictures and what we see and what we say and how we do might be otherwise. In the second half of the 20th century, there was a great deal of theater written about everyday people as tragic figures. Also, what's interesting, in contrast perhaps, is the way many visual artists, though that's kind of a limiting thing to say about someone like Bill Wegman, is the way in which they also introduced humor. And there's something about the realm of the arts that introduced something about the need to break out of tradition, of power, of greatness, and to recognize in that an incredible imaginative potential. So if I might, Chloe, if you could put the first slide up. I want us to start with this. I had the honor of going to the gallery to see the show, and yes to this, yes to sometimes realizing that this is where we are, right? And then if you could go to the second slide. After seeing the show, I was walking down Bowery and I saw this dial-up poem. And I'm putting it here next to Wegman's work, which I hope you'll read, because amusingly at the very bottom, it says, if you can get a chance to read, but what do you think? And it provides a 1-900 phone number. And I'm probably exhibiting my age here. This is apparently not so much a thing anymore. But there was this moment, right, when there were these numbers you could call. And this dial-up poem is in relation to a work by John Giorno, who some of you may recall, from 1968. He was a poet, an artist, an activist. And he presented this sort of phone number you could call where you could get poems and a lot of other interesting texts after a conversation with William Burroughs, 1968, right? In 1968, there were so many politics. It's a year associated with politics. And yet it's also a year where we needed art. We needed all different kinds of art. And so I thought this would be a nice moment to introduce Bill's work as a way of finding ourselves into whatever comes next. So from here, I want to pass it off to Andrew and Bill to start off by talking to us about why they decided to collaborate, why they decided to make a book that is not chronological, that seems to have some kind of vague order. Andrew insists that there's some kind of thematic organization, but I don't even think that that's necessarily what's crucial to this. So the two of you, could you tell us a little bit about what sparked this project?
It's up to you, Andy.
Okay. Well, first off, thank you, Charlotte, and to everybody else for being here, but Charlotte for the laying the foundation for the conversation today and bringing us truly up to date with the state of humor and the absurdity of everyday life. But the book is a different and maybe funnier subject. And I can basically explain it by saying that Bill has been working actively, minute by minute, hour by hour, every day since the 1960s. And in his early work, he was identified as a conceptualist, in part because the work he was doing fell in line with that of many other practitioners of the era, but had its own kind of distinctive quality, which I would say is a foregrounding of humor. And Bill was in California from the late 60s through 1973, at which point he moved to New York. And in that early period, he was typewriting, rather with his typewriter, writing up little stories and quips and anecdotes and hard to describe texts, which he really wasn't doing anything with in that moment and were set aside and in fact left a lot of them in the studio that he had been rented, which transferred to John Baldessari. And Baldessari held on to these materials for Bill for a couple of decades before sending them along to him in New York. And those writings join a lot of other things that happened in the meantime, including more writings. Bill in 1973 added drawing to his arsenal of outputs. And then in the 1980s, returned to what he had studied as a undergraduate and graduate student, which is painting. And So all of these things existed, and Bill's studio on 18th Street downsized a few years back, and things got moved around. And in that process, a very organized studio revealed a lot of things that had been put into boxes and not necessarily sorted through properly. And so these things happen at the same time that I'm having a conversation with Bill's wife, Christine Bergen, who herself is a publisher and gallerist, and somebody who I revere for her taste and for the quality of everything that she has done. And she mentioned this idea of somewhere within these boxes, there being content for what might be a book of Bill writings or something. She didn't really quite know what it would be, but asked if it was a good idea. And of course, I enthusiastically said yes.
Okay, I have to ask.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, when someone says there's a pile of papers and there may be something interesting in there, one does not automatically go, yes, what I want to do is that. So can you say, can you just share a little bit about why you were enthusiastic about this? Because that can also be a terrifying project.
It definitely is. And of course, the yes depends on whose papers they are. And, my feelings about Bill's work go back decades. I first saw it when I was young, the Weimaraner work. And actually, I saw World of Photography, a video Bill made in 1986 when it showed on public television back in the day. And I somehow or another saw his early videos, which, slapped me in the face as a kid. I didn't understand until seeing those that this could be video art. And I have had a fondness for his work all the while. And, the fact that I ended up knowing his wife and being in conversation, and this leading me to kind of an open invitation to look through those piles was total serendipity. It's not a pathway that I ever chose, but my background is in archiving. I was the archivist and later curator of collections and anthology film archives. And so I've worked with dozens and dozens of artists in different capacities, going into over-cramped apartments, messy studios, storage lockers, digging out gold from crap. And in Bill's case, that wasn't even the problem. It was more that, what would a book be? So on top of just looking through things, it was this kind of open invitation to imagine what a book of Bill's writings could be like, because Bill is not a essayist. He's not he doesn't have maxims or mantras that he preaches in his work. They are scattered texts. They're often elliptical and abstract and absurd. And when I started to dig through these things, one of the things I instantly realized, and it's the binding agent that makes the book work, is that text is not just something that one finds in Bill's so-called writings. It's throughout his interdisciplinary practice. You see words in the drawings, you see words in the paintings. And as much as we identify Bill as, a photographer whose primary subject has been Weimaraners, I came to understand, going through all this stuff, that language is the real common core that unifies all of these aspects of his diverse practice.
So, Bill, I wonder if you could just jump in here and say, after that year of, in theory, being in school for painting, realizing that that was not going to continue to be an immediate interest, deciding to go in. Why words? Pretty immediately you were interested in words, and you were including words. What made words interesting to you?
Well, I think it started with a video where, video that I used was more about audio than it was
Mhm.
images. I was visiting artists at the University of Wisconsin in 68 and 69, and other visiting artists that year, besides me and Arschwager and Malcolm Morley and was Robert Morris. And he said to me, because he saw the videos that I was making, he said, yes, it really is more audio. And I totally agreed with him. And I think that's really what sort of extracted me from my other work was the video. It sort of was so compelling and so unique. And I knew immediately that it was powerful and good, because when I would show it to people, they would look at it. And, as opposed to other people's video that you could see a little later through students at Cal Arts that would just turn the thing on for like 8 hours and let it go, or to show you doing something dirty or nasty or naked or whatever, was to get their attention somehow. And that sort of appealed to me. I really liked having my work seen and received. I couldn't tell. I remember doing some where I didn't know if it was good, it was interesting. Again, Arschwager and I were at a party in Wisconsin, and there was a piece of toast on the floor. And it looked like art. It looked like his art. It looks like one of his blips. And of course, we both laughed. But I think, what I was thinking about was that I would intend something, and I would want you, the audience, to get what I was doing, not thinking, yes, that's interesting. So
Andrew, as you were working with these papers and sort of, starting to get a sense of some kind of organization, were the two of you in conversation, or did you find yourself at moments thinking, no, I want to hold this back, I want to sort of reveal this to Bill? Or was it a greater dialogue between the two of you?
Well, it's a good question, because the project started in more or less November, December of 2019. And the process would be me visiting Bill's studio sometimes 2 days a week, and just starting in one area and opening a box and looking through things. And while doing that, I would often sit at a table and found myself delirious with laughter. There's just so many funny things, one after another, in stacks this deep. And Bill would be somewhere around the room and come over when he heard me laugh and look at it, and he'd read it, laugh, and then have zero memory for the most part of having ever drawn or written it, and was happy that not only was somebody laughing, like Bill just said, that the work impacted somebody, but that it had been pulled out of an invisible container. And so that continued for a while, but got stopped completely by the pandemic. And so there was a big pause. And once it was, things had leveled out a bit, some structure was back in place, I returned to the studio, where Bill really wasn't at that time. He was in his home upstate. And I just kept going through things. And I would go through a process where I would pick out stuff that I liked, call it a pre-select, and then keep going. And in that pre-selection process, I immediately started to find the themes, subliminal, subconscious themes that Bill keeps returning to in his work over the years, which I pointed out to him regularly, and he said, I didn't know I was doing that. And those are the themes that I think that the book is organized into. So that notion was coming together. However, this book, which is 350 pages, is an absolutely cruel edit of all the materials that I pulled. Luckily for me, Jason Birch, who's Bill's incredible assistant, documented, photographed everything that I had pulled, and I was able to have paper copies of these things. So a stack of maybe 2,000 pages. And the process really was this, that I said, oh shit, I pulled so much stuff. This is ridiculous. And I sat down on my floor in this room and I just made piles. I divvied them up into piles by theme. And then I got a 3-ring binder and, you know, plastic. And I laid out the book like that in order, just going, finding the themes, editing down, finding works that I, in my own subjective way, think are the bridge pieces between, let's say, architecture and money or whatever the, you know, they might be back to back. And I made the book that way. And I presented it to Bill and Christine, and a few things were taken out, a few things were added in. There was not a whole lot more of content kind of revision. I mean, it really was that primary book, which then Bill got to see it all kind of in mass for that first time.
Bill, I'm wondering, I mean, you know, clearly you'd been surprised across the process, but what was it like when you saw someone else's, I mean, like this vision of this? And also just to remind the audience, this is not in chronological order, right? That was not,
Right.
The purpose was not to try and present some kind of like, and now you will understand thought from one year to the next, right? So what was that like, Bill?
Well, I got along with Andy very well, so it's kind of flattering to have someone chuckling next to you and doing all of the work. And the most fun thing was truly, I did forget most of the things that I had done because they were put in a box in like 1972 and not seen for forever after that. But also Andy was involved with Speroni Westwater Gallery and organizing that show, which also includes recent paintings and other recent things that starts to have words in it too. So maybe we could talk a little bit about the show at Speroni Westwater and see how that differs from the book in your mind, Andy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
this picture of Mike Smith from 1982 that's on the screen right now, String Theory. If you look at it, it looks like there's a little scratch or something on it. That's actually a string on Michael Smith's sweater. And written at the bottom of that is String Theory. And so this is a great example of sort of how language functions in Bill's work to sort of push meaning in a different direction. You know, it's a portrait. It looks almost like that would be a mistake, you know, and that thing would have not been placed there on purpose. And then the title at the bottom makes you realize that it's actually much more about the string than the person who's been having a picture taken. Bill's work does that in so many ways, where the title or the caption or some of the text embedded in it undermine or subvert the initial sort of aesthetic, you know, read of it. And either way, it's a great portrait of Mike, but it requires a kind of, as a lot of humor does, either there's timing and there's a kind of a redoubling of it. You have to look and then you have to look again to find that kind of distance that happens. And I would say that if you want to look at a couple other pictures from the show, this was hysterical to me because I'm not sure that Bill's ever shown this photo in public. And as we were in the studio just going through these boxes of, you have to understand, this is a large scale Polaroid, 20 by 24 inch Polaroid that is a unique photo taken with a camera that Polaroid had. There were only 6 of them that could take this large scale image. And Bill is one of the signature artists who ever used that camera. So much of the work that we might be familiar with came through that. But when we found this, I looked at it and I had an initial laugh just because it was bubble tape and bubbles. And it was just such a oddball picture. And then as I was looking at it, Bill said, it's the number 9. And I realized that there's a sign, there's another something happening there. And the title, Celebrating Number 9, it draws your attention to that. But the fact that it's even a number, I mean, everything about that is so obtuse in a way, and that adds another level of, to me, kind of humor, and also what is clear throughout Bill's practice is kind of the conceptuality to it, even if that conceptuality, as formal as it might be, or meta, as you want to say it, is silly in some cases, like clearly this one is.
Just a little footnote to that image, which was the Polaroid 2024. The camera was invented, instigated by Dr. Land, to take actual size portraits. And so they made one of these to do that, to make instant portraits 1-to-1 actual size. And the story that I heard was after every executive wife was photographed and horrified, they moved out and invited artists to use it. So that started that. And yes, I was one of the first people to use it. I avoided using it because back in that day, I didn't do color or big. I did 11:14 black and white, more conceptual. But I did eventually agree to use it, and it did sort of break through my manifesto and allow me to do a lot more stuff that I wouldn't allow myself to do before that.
I'm just wondering if you can just speak a little bit. I mean, it gets mentioned in Andrew's essay, I believe, or maybe one of the interviews. But yeah, you started off always wanting things to be a certain size and not wanting to go big. Can you just share a little bit about why you thought of that as being a particularly important constraint for yourself?
Yeah, I wanted not to work with a wall, but to work with books and in reproduction. I think that's a smart strategy to an artist no one's ever heard of working in Wisconsin. You know, if you can get someone to publish something and can be shown in Europe or anywhere and have it be received, that's really a way to get noticed, to get attention. So that was a bit selfish, I suppose, that instigation was to work so that it doesn't change when it appears in publication.
And just on that tip, it's interesting when you think about publication, of course, you're thinking about the fact that it's not just going to be one, right? It's going to be able to be, it can be easily reproduced, right? That there would be many books that potentially people could access.
Yes.
And so,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, please, go ahead.
When I started to do the video, there was someone that was also showing video, I believe in Florence, I forgot her name, but she was making editions. And I thought that was really absurd to make an edition of video of 3, let's say. So I thought that should also be just out there for anyone and everyone. Consequently, I never made a penny on any of my video. But it really got me lots of attention. It got me on TV shows, and it got me probably to do things like eventually Sesame Street, and things like that. And it was a key medium for me.
I'm just wondering, actually, since you just brought it up, did you enjoy Sesame Street?
I never went on there, and I never really cared much about it, being like in my 40s or 50s when I first started to do that. But this wonderful woman, Arlene Sherman, came to visit me, who loved my, quote, early work, and wanted to know if I would like to do something. Mark Morris was doing things, Yo-Yo Ma. There was a whole program for people that didn't go to the show and make it there to hand in work independently. And I did that for many years until sadly Arlene died and no one replaced her to call me up and invite me. So that sort of ended that with Arlene.
Did you think in any particular way about the kind of work that you would present in that context? I mean, one of the things I feel like is sort of remarkable about Sesame Street in retrospect is the way in which it was such an adult space. But I'm just wondering if you particularly thought about what you would share or not.
We would have a meeting at the beginning of the year, and there were certain categories they were hoping I might be able to explore, like I can't remember what they were, but there are other things that you couldn't do. You couldn't do color because people's color TVs were different. So there were things that you couldn't address. And so there was a gigantic phone book size list of things that if you wanted to, you could read.
Just because you brought up color, I'm wondering, you had already mentioned color was also something you initially sort of limited. Again, what was the interest in limiting that constraint?
I'm not exactly sure, but it seemed to be too seductive and romantic and expressive. All of the not cool conceptual things I wanted to protect and keep that space. So yeah, just gradually, I think by 1978, everything that I thought about was just done, and anything was possible. And I started to paint again. I started to do this or that, the other thing, and it was a complete mess. But I loved it when there was just those three things that I did in 1971 or 2 or 3: drawings, videos, photos, with or without words, all under 11 by 14, all something I could carry under my arm and go show Conrad Fisher in Dusseldorf, or show in a museum someplace.
Have you ever tried to provide yourself with constraints since then?
I think they then provided for me. My wife, Christine, does all of that. Bill, you can't do that. It's too dark. Yeah, she's definitely the bad cop, and I'm okay. I'll do that. You can't do that, right, Andy? Yeah.
But you are, can we actually, is it possible to see one of your recent paintings? Because when we're talking about color, there it is at the end of the hallway, and there's another one there on the right. But OMG is when you're talking about the freedom to do anything, this is where it's at, Bill, can you talk about can you just explain to everybody first off what those arrows are in case they're trying to touch
This
them?
is, I looked up wrecked houses, wrecked condos, whatever on the internet, and those are from the internet, the arrows. And this was a particular building in England that was destroyed by the contractor. The guy that built it wasn't paid, so he bulldozed it with his bulldozer. And he was laughing while he was doing it. They arrested him. He's in jail for 4 years, but he's had a wonderful time wrecking this thing. And it made, when I was painting this, it looked like a great composition to work with. It's painted in acrylic and it's got charcoal words added in. So
when you saw this initially online, did it make you laugh?
It didn't. I was really looking more for things to paint. I got very, very good at painting fake wood. So I wanted to use some of that skill that I had reveling.
Well, I think we have to ask, why did you become so good at painting fake wood?
Well, I love to paint. I went to art school because I was good at painting. And then, my 5th year of art school, my first year as a grad student, painting was dead, so I had to think of something else to do. But I was really suffocated in my Spartan kind of role there as a non-painter. So when I started to paint again in, I guess, 1985, it was very liberating, and also it was really hard. I forgot how to do it. My last paintings in 1966 were sort of bad Frank Stella looking things. So this was back to my early days doing watercolors with my mother, hoping to be sick and get let out of school so I could, paint pictures from the encyclopedia. That's why I went to art school. My art teacher, I needed an A, so I took art. And my high school teacher said, you should go to art school. I applied to one school, I got in, that was Mass College of Art. And that sort of got me out of whatever else I was thinking about.
But why fake wood? You mentioned that you got really good at painting fake wood. Like, I mean, I know set design, I know people who work on sets and stuff who like really master the faux, but I'm just wondering what inspired you to really accomplish fake wood?
You'll have to ask someone else because I have no idea. But you know, there were a lot of paintings that I was doing that had a fake frame, a fake mat, and inside was a picture of a car leaking oil over this fake mat, let's say. So I was playing with the borders. Also, I was painting on wood too, so wood was around, and you know, when I would sand through, that would happen.
Well, I'd like to say that again ties back to some of the underlying both techniques and themes that go through Bill's career. And one of the installation views that we saw previous, if you go back a few, there was a wide shot of the wall before the maybe two or three more back. A little further. Two more. There we go. On the left side, you know, the show follows to a degree, to answer an earlier question, the logic of the book where things are organized into general themes. Like if you look over on the right side of the large white image, kind of almost at the center, those works deal more or less with math in different ways and equations. The ones on the left, like that picture of Mike Smith we saw before, deal with perception. And there's a lot of things like twins with individual tastes and a drawing Find the Difference. There's clowns that are drawn two completely different ways, side by side, that Bill has always had, you know, in the drawings and in the photography. The one on the far left there, it's Bill holding a phone upside down to his ear, and then the second photo is right side up, and the text underneath the first one says mistake, and the next one says correction. And I feel like that the faux painting, the faux wood and things like that in Bill's current work draws a line to those sorts of switcheroos, fake outs, the kind of double takes that he has sort of built his work around, including works where, you know, dogs are substituted for humans. So there's this sort of substitution factor, or this, you know, I don't want to get into semiotics or something, but the signs of symbols and things like that. And I think that the wood, if we were to go highfalutin, we could draw that into it.
Well, and also, I mean, it makes me think of the way in which with so many of the writings on the Princess Cruise Lines paper, you X things out, you cross things out, and yet they are there, right? So it's kind of like you're sort of torn as a reader between like, wait, there's that impulse, oh, it's crossed out, therefore I don't read it. But of course it's there, so I must read it. And it's that sort of, I've always thought it was sort of fun and interesting that you did that.
I never expected those to be seen, so I have to blame Andy for that because they never really saw the light of day. There were a few stories or paragraphs that I wrote that ended up being reproduced here and there, but mostly they were just in a box, and I would show them to nobody really, and they let out of this thing by Andy.
Well, part of the aspect of the book that, you know, maybe I edited it, but obviously, and I'd be the first one to say this, it's definitely Bill's book, and it's Bill's work. It just happens to have been put in a particular order by me, and in doing that, it was always very important. And where Bill was and Christine both were very involved in the process of the design and layout of the book, which Scott Ponick, who's in Portland, Oregon, did. He's a fantastic designer who I've worked with on previous books, one of Tony Conrad's writings, a book of George Kuchar, the filmmaker's writings and material. But, you know, one of the aspects of the book is to present things as objects, as they are, as, you know, I don't want to say archival, but, you know, actual. And so in Bill's writing, which was made for himself, he made spelling mistakes. He crossed things out. You'll see there's a couple of instances in the book, and there's many instances that aren't in the book, that some of these things, which texts, which like a sentence, it seems like a tossed off aside, he might do it 2 or 3 times and remove one word or add a word, and that they're actually, you know, they are, some of them, quite labored over. And the ones that are in the book, you present a really interesting take on what's a real situation of, am I supposed to read this? And in fact, you know, even in my intro, I begin the intro with a long spiel that sounds academic, that has strike through lines through it. And, you know, I like that kind of aspect of Bill's practice in this book, in that it's sort of revealing, and it's as much about kind of an artist having fun in their studio as much as an artist making work for Documenta or some major exhibition. This is sort of like, if you were to wander into Bill's studio, you might find this stack of things sitting on a desk, you know.
I just want to note for the audience, I might not be familiar with the book, so I have it with me. One of the things that's really quite beautiful about it, that I think, you know, Andrew was just alluding to, is the pages aren't framed, right? So when you're looking at a page, you're looking at the work on the page, which gives the impression, the experience of, you're holding the page, you're holding the work itself. There isn't like a caption at the bottom that provides a title, year, medium, like all the stuff that then suddenly produces that kind of framing device around the work that creates a little bit of distance. So it's this really quite, you know, sort of extraordinary, nice, I mean, pick your word, experience of looking at it and feeling as if you're really in a much more intimate experience with the work. And I took it, though I gathered there was some conversation between the two of you, that was part of what the advantage of this type of cover was, that there was this sense of like, these are the sort of immediate, you know, intimate, like the sketchbook, the sort of the writing notebook that artists and writers and so forth have. But I gather that there was some confusion around the cover as well.
Well, when going through the boxes, you know, you would find drawing pads and legal pads and things that had phone numbers. And I mean, it really wasn't art per se. It might be telephone doodles while waiting to find out bank information and all that kind of stuff. And the particular writing tablet on the cover, one of the first things I noticed is that Bill had drawn on it. On the space, there would be a blank space. It says, and this is, of course, Mead brand paper. It says, "Dear Dr. Mead, I feel sick. My tummy is gooey like. Oh, oh, oh. What time is it where you are? I mean, what zone are you in? Your pal Bill W," which cuts off PS, and then you can't read the PS because of the you know, advertisement for the plain sheets that they stuck on it. And for me, I saw that, and I think that the decision personally was over, that that's the cover of the book. And you know, but the next question became, because obviously that's confusing, down to the fact that it has a, you know, a UPC barcode on it, and where you're supposed to scan, was how to present it. Because also, this being a book that you want people to buy, there should be a title on it. And we had to make space for that, which landed up here. And also scale. I mean, one of the things about Bill's work that we've talked about, it's 11 by 14, and you know, the drawings really are, there's one per page. How he drew them and how they have been exhibited or printed in previous books is they're not comic strips. There's not like, you know, 5 of them on a single page, so they're individual. And Bill really often works on, you know, letter-sized paper. And this little eagle pad is actually small. It's only 6 by 9 inches, whereas the book is, you know, 8.5 by 10. So Bill had the great idea to take the picture of the legal pad on his ping pong table, and which lets this edge along the side, which of course makes no sense whatsoever and is maybe not even clearly visible as a ping pong table. And if it were to be, that would be all the more confusing. So the confusion I have heard from people is that because there's a $1.69 price tag on it, and this UPC, that it takes them, and this is another thing, a Bill Wegman double take to figure out exactly what's going on there. And for Bill and myself, that's perfect. That's exactly what we're going for, because there's no singular image that represents the sort of work within the book, but this being the cover of something on the cover of a book, it having text, but as is often the case with Bill's writings, the words themselves are the drawing. You have a few stills in here, the one of the time we spent together equals, and it's a math equation. That's one of the slides that I saw earlier. That's a drawing. Bill isn't somebody who in his world of drawing has reoccurring characters. He doesn't have Ziggy or Charlie Brown or anything like that. Often what you have is the reoccurrence of words. And I thought that would be a great sort of gateway into this book.
There's early on, sort of in that kind of theme, there's an image I sort of shown a little bit earlier, this one, but the writing that accompanies this fairly realist watercolor is impression of what a sunflower looks like rather than what a sunflower actually looks like. I'm not interested in reproducing what it really looks like. Right. And there's this way in which that's sort of like, well, right, it's not what it really looks like. But of course it is what it really looks like, because it's not some sort of abstraction. And so there's this kind of, again, like the writing speaks to this idea that you were just discussing, Andrew, right? The way in which we both are being presented with what we're looking at, but it's also being questioned for us. We have to think through, am I looking at a representation? Wait, what do I mean by that? How do I think about that? But this is semi-real, like it really sort of pushes against this notion of like, what are we looking at? Are we taking at face value what we look at because of the way we've been trained to look at things and to see things? How comfortable are we looking at things on our own terms, right? How often we default into wanting the artist to tell us what the work is about, right? This is what this work is about. The way that the title is often supposed to tell you who is in the portrait or what it is, or, and then when that's gone, it's really quite challenging and also incredibly exciting, if you can enjoy that sort of discomfort, to start to think, okay, well, what do I think? How do I think? What do I want to think about? Do I want to risk the fact that I could have something that might have had nothing to do with what the artist was doing or what anyone else thinks about this piece, right? It's this kind of interest. I mean, I think some of the great things that conceptual art did was to throw us back upon ourselves and to ask us to stand in our own vision of what we see, however uncomfortable that makes us. These photographs, yes, so one sees these photographs, they're in the gallery. And remind us why you decided to do what appear to be these incredibly staged, almost like these sort of 19th century starlit images?
Well, my friend Eve Darcy, who's the model here, I've encountered more than one person that just, really cares and demands to be photographed. My dogs could care less. They're good at it, and they enjoy the work. But this girl, Eve, just, was so strong and so game. I kept thinking of things for her to do. And with a Polaroid camera, where you would never know what you were going to do, you just show and take some exposures and see what was going to happen. I just would bring stuff there and just start playing around. So at that time, I was really interested in not liking opera. So these are like a little operatic bit right here.
Speaking of music, I understand you have quite you have convictions around music.
Well, I don't really inflict the music that I listen to on anyone, and I'm not a composer, so I don't have anything at stake. So I can really like Brahms, and I can really like Philip Glass, and I can really like Elliott Carter. So I don't have a stake. I once had a talk with Philip Glass because I mentioned that I like Brahms, and he said, "How can you like Brahms? It's so dead." But I do. And the reason I can like Brahms is I'm not invested. He's not threatening me. I don't have to. I don't have to look to my own century if I don't want to.
The anxiety of influence isn't present there.
Right. So interestingly, Philip said that he was just joking when he told me he hated Brahms, but I really believed him for like 15 years and was kind of tormented by that possibility that I was liking somebody I shouldn't. But he released me from that obligation, and now I don't like Brahms on my own. I don't really need people not to like him, but whatever.
I hate being told what you're not allowed to like. It's a real cultural jail that you can be put into.
If you're making something and you feel like it should be in your century somehow, but if you're liking something that's some century ago, you have to think about it, right?
Well, and it's easy when you start to feel like, well, somewhat like this person's opinion weighs more, right? Like somehow, even though there's many different people, actually the different opinions from different people wind up weighing more. And there's this sort of weird internal calibration, quantification, mathematics that we start to go through. And which is a theme in some of the works that Andrew included in the book, the sort of like playing with math and playing with notions of quantification and numbers that comes across in your writings. There was the one that Andrew mentioned, the time we spent together was worth the time we spent, or something within the mathematics. There's a sort of wonderful Princess Cruz letter about the difference between a smart man and a stupid man. Actually, I'm just going to very briefly read it because I find this quite amusing, if I may. The difference between a smart man and a stupid man is that when you ask a smart man a question, he will probably know it crossed out, the answer, having remembering reading about it somewhere. And the stupid man will either give you the wrong answer or tell you he doesn't know. However, since it's impossible to be smart in all things, and it is unlikely that anyone could be stupid in everything, the best way to find out is to resort to a statistical method. Mark a check for every correct answer and an X for each wrong one, and at the end of the question period, count them up. He who has the most checks will be the smartest, and the guy with the most X's will be the stupidest. The letter then goes on to talk about other things, as so many of your letters do, because there's a sort of amalgamation of different ideas on a page. But I think in this moment where quantification is so common and statistics and data and percentages are constantly being thrown at us as like somehow as a way to know something, like this conviction that this is what is good or bad. 80% of people like Brahms, therefore Brahms is good, sort of thing. I was amused by the idea that I could sit there and sort of, assign checks and X's to all the people I meet in conversation, and at the end of the conversation, give them a tally and let them know you were smart. No, you were actually quite stupid. Anyway,
I'm glad I could be of some help.
Can I read one that I really like?
Please.
As long as I've just written an urgent memorandum and have to get it to room 202 right away, but my secretary is out to lunch. Would you mind taking it up for me? Just give it to the receptionist or leave it on her desk if she's not there. 202 is on the second floor between the women's room and the water cooler. The stairs are just as fast. So from there, you take a left until you get to the end of the corridor, and then another left, and a room is on the right, about halfway down. You might remember that by saying, this memorandum is to be left on the receptionist desk, and I'm delivering it because his secretary left, and I must do it right away. Thank you. I don't have anything to say. That makes me happy.
Would you repeat that? I'm confused.
We'll let you read it. It's, as we're sort of, coming to the end of our portion of the conversation before we get to, the various questions that audiences have, I think, one of the things that's great fun about this, at least for me, right? Like, Andrew, you've spent so much time with Bill. I sort of feel like, you've had the opportunity to sort of sort through the various different kinds of reactions that you can have, but not having had that and sort of, only in enjoying the book in a much briefer sense and getting a semblance of some of these works through the book. I've really enjoyed the way it feels freeing. I've really enjoyed the way in which it makes me loosen my own grasp on an idea that I have, or the way I think that something should be. The sense that, even like an image of Pennsylvania called the Quaker State, where the entire thing is labeled Philadelphia, actually, right? And then Philadelphia has a star and it's labeled Pennsylvania. It's like, the way in which we conceive of things can get so stagnant, and it's nice sometimes to just be uprooted from that. So that, I guess that's sort of one of the things I wanted to share with Bill, that I just really, and with Andrew for putting the effort together of this book, but for the pleasure it was just to be able to float through it and to not feel like I even have to read it page after page, but that I could just dip in and out and appreciate a different kind of thinking. It's a really nice effort.
I'm glad that you realize that the pressure of reading is taken off with this book, and it's more about the joy of reading and the sequential linear nature of how we read things is not important to this book. While it is, it does have a structure to it. And if it doesn't automatically reveal itself, it might if you jump around. And I like that aspect of it very much, because it feels like it, in a lot of ways, mirrors just the diversity of Bill's practice, and also the way that these things, which seem disparate, actually are quite, interlaced. So.
On that note, I feel like we should open it up to the audience to be able to ask questions directly.
Please.
That's great. We have a question from our friend. First of all, thank you to all of you for that. It was really lovely to hear about the exhibition and the book. I'm going to turn over the floor to our friend GE, who has a question. GE. I'm going to unmute you now.
There we go. I think we're, yeah, okay,
Yeah,
thank
there
you.
we go.
So thank you so much, Chloe, and thank you for your patience. Question for Charlotte and Andrew and William. More philosophical perhaps, and this is actually so needed on today of all days, of course. But because we know that humor is not really a mood, but more a way of looking at the world, can we say that if humor were to be stamped out, that it doesn't mean that people aren't in good spirits or anything of that sort, but that something much deeper and more important is going on?
Who wants that one?
I mean, I'll start off by saying I don't think humor can be stamped out. I actually I think humor is actually, do I think this? Maybe I feel this. I'm gonna say I feel humor often in the darkest places. It's almost a compulsion. There's a sense of, it's a life force, maybe it's the thing that obviates the death drive, if we want to go down some kind of Freudian path, which I would prefer we not, but anyway, that, you know, there's some of us, I'm one of those people, if I'm really exhausted, burnt out, working all the time, what happens on the other side of just being weepy and exhausted is I get really punchy. I just start to think everything is really funny, which can be quite weird for other people, which then maybe makes them think things are funny. So I'm not sure that humor can be stamped out. And I actually think, if I can just, you know, go back to the politics of it for a moment, I think that's what's terrifying about humor, that you can't stamp it out, that it will arise, and that it obviates predictiveness. It appears where things can't always be assumed. And that's a pretty amazing human resistance to a type of dogma. So maybe that I'll leave it at that and see what Andrew and Bill want to say.
My real, you know, and it can only be personal, you know, take on it is that I'm not exactly like practicing in any religious way, but I'm Jewish, and so I don't know what life without humor is. It's DNA, it's chemistry, it's, you know, it's Groucho Marx, it's you know, it's the producers being made, what, 23 years after the Holocaust. I mean, it's just somehow it's a defense mechanism as much as it is a sharp knife, you know, with which to sort of go into the world and to carve a path out. And, you know, I agree that what Charlotte said, I mean, humor is the only way to address things that by and large evade direct sunlight, you know, things that we can't really socially raise as topics, and even interpersonally. And that's why, you know, again, avoiding Freud, I think that humor is, some people aren't funny, for sure. I know many, but you know, I feel like it's more difficult to be serious than it is to be humorous. That's maybe personal to me, but culturally speaking, how I was, you know, how my DNA works, that's just how I have always seen it. Bill gets to put the cherry on top of this.
Well, I was born in 1943, a sick and lonely child. I turned to photography early on. My mother used to help me turn the Hasselblad crank and load the film. And that's how I started. But my sister noticed that my parents, neither of them were funny, but both she and I had a funny bone. So I think you're just sort of born with it or you're not.
Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks for that question, GE. And the final question today comes from our very own Fong Bui.
That was amazing. Neil, Andy, and Charlotte, I can listen to you forever. And it's an amazing show, a luminous book. And I have so many questions, but I keep it simple. I mean, I think I just want to follow up about humor. You know, what you get in touch with humor also when you know what it meant to be comical. Sometimes it bring out that part of it. Sometimes it's very hard to make the difference, but comic or humor, I think it's not a matter of the intellect. It's not a mere pleasure of intellect at all. It's human, and it's a social activities, and it has social meaning. And I know that from my own observation, for example, since you mentioned 1968 being a significant year, Charlotte, certainly it was a significant year because that was a year that the Tet Offensive, where I was born into, growing up in Vietnam, it was a year that, you know, Robert Kennedy was assassinated right after Dr. King. It was a year, believe it or not, I believe it's Mr. Roger air on TV, and it was the year that Nixon won the White House, and many other, I'm sure, landmark event, including Arthur Ashe won the Wimbledon, first African-American, you know, tennis player. But the point is 69, Bill, this is a question for you, and I have one coming up for you, Andy. 69, important year too in the art world because Harold Simon create attitudes when attitude become form. And every artist who I get a chance to, I ask him or her about the inclusion. You were in that show, Bill. So would you share with us what was like in that landmark historical show?
Oh, that's an amazing catalog, and I'm so happy to be in it, but I haven't a clue. I think no one remembers my piece over there. It was probably just kept in a box and never displayed, whatever it was. Yeah, but more importantly, you know, my name's in that catalog, so you remembered it, and here I am, and here we are talking about it. And what I did was so amazing. But that year was 1969. I was teaching at University of Wisconsin. I just started to make the videos there. And that was a big year for me too, for sure. And, you know, we never knew were we going to be drafted and sent over there. Many of us stayed in art school for too long, just so we wouldn't be drafted if we were males. That's why I got to have an MFA, because it kept me out of that for a while. And then, you know, I had to read the Bible and Borges and go insane to not be drafted, but was able to pull that off. So here I am talking to all of us.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I have the catalog, so I'm happy that I have it in my collection. It's over there somewhere.
Yeah, it's a great catalog, isn't it?
A great catalog. It's amazing. But so okay, so this is my second question. It can go to you or even Andy, because Andy and I share a deep admiration and very, you know, long-lasting friendship with Jonas Makers. And I remember Jonas was telling me how at some point when he and Dick Higgins crash, like they clash, you know, because Higgins was writing to make Fluxus a bit too academic, where Fluxus was meant to be amplification of humor and playfulness, right, Andy? You correct me if I'm wrong here.
Yeah.
So my question is that, how did that fit in when you came to New York? Was it have any significant influence in your thinking at the time? I don't mean just Fluxus alone, but definitely the whole experimental film community surrounded by Cinematheque leading to anthology film archives eventually. Bill.
Oh, I thought that was for Andy. I kept waiting for him to open his mouth.
Okay, let's have Andy go
Or
first.
let Andy take that one. He's more the historian than I am.
Well, Bill's work, and you know, the awareness of Bill had in Massachusetts, and then studying in Champaign, Urbana, Illinois, and then being, you know, in the Midwest. I mean, a lot of Bill's exposure to the advanced guard of the time came through publications and periodicals, and so, you know,
Art Forum
Art Forum.
was really big then. You know, if you were the cover of Art Forum, you really had made it. Right now, it's nothing in a way, but it was in 1969, 68, I think.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a smaller media landscape, and there's more importance put on to, you know, particular publications, or in the case, somebody like Jonas Mekas, who, as the critic for the Village Voice, even though it's a New York newspaper, it was a international position to be in, because nobody else was championing to that level the kind of hard to see, obscure, and largely unpopular work that he was declaring as the most groundbreaking art of the time. And so Fluxus, Bill, I have to imagine, if you had been exposed to it, was via reproduction, or, you know, I don't know if you knew any of the original Fluxus people when you came to New York, or came
Yeah,
to.
I think my line was kind of from Frank Stella and those black on black paintings to then Robert Morris and Saul LeWitt and Andre, and, you know, works like that. And I guess the humor that happened, I don't know where that happened, but it wasn't then. But that was how I came out, not so much that way.
And also your videos, when they were shown, they weren't really shown in cinema context, right? They were shown in gallery context.
Yeah, right. And it kind of made it look like, you know, when you go to the Louvre and you see the Mona Lisa with a crowd around it, that's what my video looked like. There'd be a group show, and there'd be 40 people around my painting and nobody around the next person. So it had collecting an audience is pretty bizarre, very unfair.
One of the funny things, though, the connection there between Bill and certainly underground experimental film and anthology, is that in the early 80s, Bill made his earliest work, as did Namjoon and all the sort of first wave of video artists, on open reel half-inch videotape. So it was really two spools. You took tape from one, you wound it up on the other, and recorded it through the deck. And then video was copies of copies of copies. And by the late 70s already, these things were falling apart. And Anthology Film Archives, with under the direction, the video program of Shigeko Kubota and Robert Harris, engaged in video preservation program in the early 1980s. And so Bill's early works are some of the first tapes that they transferred. And in that case, video preservation meant taking works on formats that were becoming extinct and putting them onto then contemporary video formats, which now are also extinct. So it has been this thing where film preservation is making a copy of a film and having a negative and keeping it, but video has been this system of transfers and upgrades. So Anthology did do a lot to help safeguard Bill's early video legacy back in the early 1980s.
It's super true. Yeah, and when you mentioned about the late 60 Bill, Art Forum, I believe, where Angela got her start, actually. She's on the street here, working in the early 70s. But I think it came to New York in 67 when it moved to New York from LA. And I know the first issue feature Michael Free art and objecthood, and solo with paragraph of conceptual art. It was a very important issue. But again, you know, I also learned about you, Bill, through Avalanche Gallery. I mean, magazine. Avalanche was very important It's lasted for 5 years, from 70 to 75. Willoughby shop ended up being my neighbor in Greenpoint, actually, 2 doors down. And so that was important too, in terms of a similar archive in your own work, and just like when attitude become form. So congratulations.
That really made my day in a way, because that's sort of what I was hoping would happen living in Wisconsin and then LA, was to reach this audience. And then through Avalanche, that was probably my first thing, and being in other shows and being in catalogs. So to me, it was incredibly exciting to have that.
Yeah, well, thank you, Bill. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Charlotte. And one of the reasons why the rail has to be in print, because I'm afraid that when it disappeared through technological, I don't know, printed is so important to me. It will be a permanent archive for what we do. So yes, thank you. Get back to you. And yeah, thank you. And also, please go see the show, everyone. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's amazing curation by our friend here, Andy. And thanks for the conversation, Bill and Charlotte. And coming back to you, Chloe.
Great. Thank you so much. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading. And today I'm thrilled to welcome our Poet Laureate of the Day, Jonathan Aprea, to the stage. Writer Jonathan Aprea currently lives in New York City, a graduate of Syracuse University's MFA program. His poems have appeared or are forthcoming in Guernica, Washington Square Review, Sixth Finch, and elsewhere. His chapbook, Dyson Poems, was published by Monster House Press in 2018. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thanks, Chloe. Yeah, I just want to start by thanking everyone at the Brooklyn Rail for having me. That was a fantastic combo, and yeah, I feel really thrilled to be able to follow it. So I'm just going to read 5 poems. They're pretty short, they're sonnets. So yeah, I'll just get started. The first poem is called My Neighbor's Room. You guide me into the room with no walls that requires a stack of permeable screens to be carried out and installed in its window openings, which permit the ocean air to come in the summer and inspire you and go out like a breath. You tell me about your late wife's voice, how it issues from her sunlit pictures, speaking to us in the radio's songs. Your heart beats, embedded with an inimical plaque. The art of a life is maybe to be repetitive, to ascertain meaning out of invisible air, to capitulate to the wry smell of ocean life that has died in order to reappear as other things. When we are done, we are contained by the positioned screens. The birds in your yard try to be instruments. It is the 6th month of the year. This next poem is called Birds. Every night I smoke a little bit of THC out of a vape pen I bought over Christmas a few years ago in Massachusetts at this place near Waterwiz. I take 2 or 3 hits spaced out by a few minutes so I can see if I'm getting too stoned. There is an abyss I try to avoid, an infrastructure beneath which the faces of birds emerge from the properties of the furniture in my room. I'm afraid of when this happens. I listen to an old playlist and hope instead for the familiar glove that comes to uncrush my chest's paper. Assist me, benevolent hand. Make me the dove that disappears. Astonish them. Open your fist. This next poem is called Ball Pit. I am made out of aluminum alloy and tarps and thousands of little plastic balls filled with air. I exist for the children of the crawl tubes and slides who have just eaten. Sometimes I feel like I'm an ocean, but I am still these plastic balls. In summer, I polka dot the air, levitating into the oceanscape's middle distance, a dark cloud composed of the individual colors until I precipitate over the earth and reassemble along the roadside in little ruts. People pick me up to just throw me off bridges at cars. I bounce hollowly down the middle of a highway, disappearing into the herbicide grass. This is where I live my 1,000 years, until I can barely remember the qualities of the laughter of children. The atmosphere dissolves into stars. The oxygen I release is not enough. This is the second to last poem. It's called At the Dentist. I begin to believe in a secret beneath what the tube snaking out of my lips whispers while it removes blood from my mouth. I will my gums stinging to be like an abstract impression of light clinging painlessly to the dark field of my mouth. Some fireflies darken in the fragrant shrubs that lie beside the road's lip where we run from each other, playing with flashlights in the dark. One night, we went down to the beach and dug out a space to hide beneath an upturned boat. Where does it go? The sand, the sky's stars. Your shirt was black with silk-screened white flowers. It hurts for you to be in my head, blossoming in the dull air, disappearing out of a tube. Where does it go? Where? And then this final poem is called Cup of Sand. I was taught to mix sand with flour. I learned this from my mom, who learned it from a book, which was printed with another state's resources. I grew up beside a construction materials company. Sand would blow over the grass in such quantities I only reached into the blades to collect it. I learned to give thanks to the eroded land, to fall asleep in incredible discomfort. The walls of my stomach bled sympathetically. My dead neighbors, the heavy metals in their flesh. You have to eat the sand, rinse it in an unfathomable bowl. And that's it. So thanks again so much.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That was incredible. Thank you. And thank you, Bill, Andy, and Charlotte. We would also like to thank Natasha from Speroni Westwater for helping make today's event possible. Over the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has brought together art, music, dance, film, theater, literature, and thoughtful social and political meditations in our monthly publication and in our public events, like here in our daily NSE. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support our writers, editors, and operations here at the Rail. And please join us Monday at 1 p.m. for a conversation, Defamiliarizations in Chinese Visual Culture and Aesthetics, Part 2, with Sui Fei and Paul Gladstone. We conclude with a poetry reading by Yibing Huang. And you can now turn on your microphone and say goodbye as you leave.
Thank you,
Thank you all.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you, Bill.
Wonderful
Bill.
sonnets, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful poems. Beautiful.
Oh, there's the dogs.
Thank you, Jonathan.